All right, we're back again with another webinar series. This time we are with Christian Wade. Thank you very much, Christian, for your time today. We're going to do just about an hour session, similar format as what we did previously. We're going to do about 40-45 minutes of just straight demo time from the ALM Toolkit. Christian will explain what's going on with the toolkit, why you need to use it, how important it is for you to use this tool in your development with your tabular models. And then we'll leave it open for about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions. If anything you have questions directly for Christian, I will filter those out in the Q&A area. So just feel free to type those in, and let's get going. Thanks, Christian, for your time. Let me just transition the video to you here. And if you'd like to go ahead and share your computer screen, I will fire that up as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mike. Hello, everyone. Just give me 1 second. I'm just getting organized here.
And if you guys are on the webinar, feel free to let me know where you guys are calling in from or watching from. We'd love to kind of see where around the world people are kind of hanging out and checking out the webinar. All right, looks like we have content that is live. We can see your screen. It is
brilliant.
Up and running. Okay,
all
we
right.
are good to go. We
Thank
made
you very
it.
much. Glad we made it. Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate you setting this up and giving people like Daniel and myself the opportunity to show off these tools, because they are really helpful for customers. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the program management lead for analysis services, which covers SQL Server analysis services, Azure analysis services, and also the analysis services features and capabilities in Power BI, bringing those kind of enterprise BI workloads to Power BI. I work for Microsoft. This tool, the ALM Toolkit, it's one of the tools that has its lineage in the analysis services tools space, as does Tabular Editor, as does DAX Studio, and as do other tools. There's the analysis services, in case you're not aware, is 20 years old now and has a rich heritage, has always had a rich heritage in kind of community open source tools with things like Bids Helper, and there was the MDX stored procedure project with that's showing my age now, but you know, we have a rich heritage of analysis services open source community tools. And we just launched the XMLA endpoint in Power BI, which is basically the analysis services protocol that gives you access to the analysis services engine in Power BI, which by definition means that all of these community tools now by definition just automatically work with Power BI. So ALM Toolkit actually has its heritage from another tool called BISM Normalizer. So it's actually the same build, it's the same logic, it's the same DLL that's running, it's just a different UI. And BISM Normalizer has a ton of users. It's been a very popular tool for a long time, and it runs as an extension in Visual Studio. But since most Power BI model authors don't necessarily have Visual Studio, ALM Toolkit is more kind of a rebranded version for Power BI. All right, so you can get it here from the ALM Toolkit website. Which, if I zoom in here, it's simply alm-toolkit.com. All right, and so you can also go to this how to use page, and honestly, it's a very, very powerful tool. It does a ton of really complex things in the back end, but it's actually a very easy to use, very simple tool. If you go through this single page, right, this is the extent of it. This really covers about 80% of what you need to know. There's just a handful of buttons here on the toolbar, which I'll show you in the demo. And really, to get 80% of the benefit out of it, this is all you really need to know, right? ALM Toolkit is a schema comparison tool for Power BI datasets. And schema comparison is a mature area for relational databases. There's many companies that build products in that space. One of the best known ones is Redgate SQL Compare, which actually ships, the base version of it ships for free in Visual Studio 2017 and above. and Microsoft, our own kind of diff and merge schema comparison tool for relational databases is called Schema Compare, which ships in SQL Server data tools. All right, so this is basically the same concept, but it is for Power BI datasets. So I'll cover some of these scenarios here. So let me just make this nice and big before I jump into a demo. So you can use it for incremental, easy metadata only deployment, right? So as you'll see in the demo, this is especially helpful for things like incremental refresh. So incremental refresh is a very, very popular feature in Power BI. The usage is going through the roof. It's just hit general availability in February. It's now supported in shared and pro capacities. And especially on premium, there are lots of these large models in premium that use incremental refresh to get to the large model sizes. There's the large models feature that really works in conjunction with incremental refresh to get you to the dataset sizes that are beyond the 10 gigabyte limit. But even for smaller models like 1 or 2 or 3 gigabytes, it makes a lot of sense to use incremental refresh to speed up the refresh times, make them more reliable, not be subject to source system issues, long-running queries on top of volatile source systems, and it's just it makes a lot of sense from the kind of efficiency of the refresh perspective. So we have incremental refresh, and then so the first time I publish my incremental refresh model, I invoke a refresh. It might take a couple of hours to load all the historical data. Subsequent refreshes are really fast because it's only refreshing the data that has changed for the last couple of days, for example. I then want to add a measure to that data set. I want to make a change to that data set. What do? I go into Power BI Desktop. In fact, I can quickly show you this since I've got it right here. I go into Power BI Desktop. I add a measure or something, and then I go to deploy it. And then the Power BI Desktop publish flow says, oh, you've already got a version of that data set in the service. Do you want to replace it? No, I don't. It took me like 2 or 3 hours to refresh that thing. I do not want to have to go through that all over again. Right? And I got users using this data set right now. I don't want to have downtime of 2 to 3 hours and have to nurse the refresh. I've already done all that work. I just want to do because the version of my Power BI Desktop file using incremental refresh might be like 10 megabytes big, right? It's only going to have a little sample subset of the data, and so I want to, instead of replacing the whole data set and having to invoke the whole historical refresh again, all I want to do is do an incremental metadata only deployment to just pick that one measure that I need for, maybe it's a bug fix or something, and just push that measure in isolation, right? I don't want to push everything else. I don't want to replace the data. There's other stuff here in the data set I'm still working on. I don't want to do any of that, right? I just want to do an incremental metadata only deployment. So the publish flow here in Power BI Desktop doesn't work for that scenario, right? So if I cancel out of there and I switch back to the scenarios a second, so you can use it for easy incremental metadata only deployment. You can use it to reuse objects across Power BI datasets or tabular models. So it's kind of a similar scenario to composite models, where you want to combine data potentially from different datasets. But really, the composite models feature that we're going to ship this year is targeted at the analyst that is consuming data from the big enterprise corporate model, that just wants to mash up data from an Excel file or a local data set or something like that, and really empower the analyst to get a single report that integrates that data without having to wait potentially weeks for IT to build that extra bit of data into the data warehouse and the corporate semantic model. Which they may not even have the bandwidth to do, and it may be a data set that's only relevant to that analyst anyway, right? So that's what the composite models feature that we're going to ship this summer is going to allow the analyst to do. But if I'm a BI pro and I'm not building an analyst PBIX, I'm building a semantic model with 10, 20, 30, 40 gigabytes of compressed data. I'm not going to create one of those composite models over like 3 or 4 enterprise semantic models of that scale, typically, even though technically I could, and in some cases I might, but typically I wouldn't, because there'd be a performance overhead in trying to join those large volumes across the the different semantic models at runtime. So I can use it to kind of extract the metadata from each of I can use it for kind of master metadata management. I can have, common objects across my semantic models, conformed dimensions, and I can combine the metadata across different semantic models, kind of for the enterprise semantic model level rather than the analyst consumption level, if that makes sense, right? You can also use it to bridge the gap between self-service and corporate BI. You have an analyst that makes a really interesting discovery. It gets popular. The data refreshes become too much to manage. They want to hand it over to IT to be operationalized and integrated into the semantic models and reviewed for alignment with corporate naming standards and things like that. And it just makes it a lot easier if you can just extract as a starting point the parts of the analyst model that you want and maintain the essence of what the analyst had in mind when you're going to harvest those insights. And there are some other kind of advanced scenarios as well, like multi-user collaboration with diff and merge across repos. I mean, currently with desktop, there's a bit more work for that to work end to end. You can also run it from a command line for automation if you want to have repeatable deployments across environments in an automated fashion as well. So I won't delve into these kind of advanced scenarios very much. I'm going to focus more on the top one or two scenarios in the demo. So shall I just jump straight into the demo, Mike?
Yeah, you can keep going. And I have a good example around this. I was just showing a client the bridge the gap between self-service and corporate BI.
Yeah.
It worked really well. And I was able to show them, hey, you had a model that's been here for a year, and I had made some changes, and I was able to quickly go through and compare the two models. Within a couple minutes, I knew what had changed and was able to quickly show them, okay, we need to add these couple things here, and we know we're good. So I can't express how helpful this is, because if you don't have a tool like this, you have to literally go through line by line and look at all of your DAX measures or extrapolate them out some other way. This was a huge time saver for me, and I can't say enough good things about how helpful this was when I was working in SSDT with this tool as well, with the whole system.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Really like it.
Yeah, there's so many little scenarios that people point out that I hadn't even thought. Like one person told me, I'm using it just as a sanity check to check what the difference is between my development and test environments, because no one knows,
Exactly.
like just to keep track of where all the features are across environments, just, an easy schema diff report type thing. So absolutely. So thank you for that. I love it. Makes me feel good to know. All right.
No questions. Keep cruising if you'd like to go.
Okay. Sorry, say that again.
Oh, there's no questions. You can kind of keep cruising.
Cool. I'll keep cruising. Okay, cool. So the prerequisites for it, just before I jump into the demo, you need to download the installer. It's available on almtoolkit.com. If you're using it it works. It requires the XMLA endpoint, which is a Power BI Premium feature for technical reasons, because it requires that analysis services protocol for compatibility with the kind of analysis services tooling. So for deployment across Power BI workspaces, it does need to be on a premium workspace. And you also need to have the enhanced dataset metadata set in Power BI Desktop. And that's assuming you're using Power BI Desktop, which is what we're going to focus on. But again, it works with other modeling and authoring tools as well, like SQL Server Data Tools and Tabular Editor, right? Or with those models. All right, so back to Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to quickly show you here the option for enhanced dataset metadata, which is here. So you need this for all of the third-party tool integration, the extensibility model that we're building for Power BI. You also need this for XMLA. This actually means that the dataset metadata that Power BI Desktop is storing is very close to the analysis services tabular object model metadata. In fact, if you were to save the PBIX as a PBIT, crack it open and look in the data model file, you'd see basically tabular object model metadata in JSON format rather than a load of base 64 encoded blob looking, you know,
Yes.
M expressions and a ton of like, you know, annotations, and just basically looks like a bit of a blob without this thing enabled, right? So you need this enabled. And then, so let's say I've got a model out there. It's like, I don't know, 20, 30 gigabytes in size. It took a few hours to refresh, and I've been working on a new version of it here in Power BI Desktop. And I've added maybe some calculation groups, translations, and measures and things like that. I want to deploy a new version of it. So I'm going to come over to the amazing new external tools ribbon that has not shipped yet. This will ship this summer. This was built by Daniel Ottekier. We're very grateful to Daniel. He's also the author of Tabular Editor, which is a fantastic semantic modeling tool. That obviously he's done a ton of shows for you already, Mike.
Yes, he has. He did a full series.
A full series.
Yeah.
So we're very grateful to Daniel for that. And you'll be able to launch. Actually, you'll be able to launch not just these 3 tools. You've got DAX Studio. And where, you know, Darren Gosbell has put a lot of time into this and is the primary author for that, and then ALM Toolkit, and there'll be other tools that show up here as well. This is an extensibility model. We're going to be publishing how you can build your own tools to enhance Power BI Desktop in the future. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and launch the ALM Toolkit. Now, I'm just going to point out that without this external tools ribbon, I can actually launch ALM Toolkit and then just open up the connection, click the compare button, and then as you can see, it's immediately connected to the Power BI Desktop instance that's running here in the background. And then my target can be a data set or a file. It can be a PBIT file or a BIM file. But I could actually do this without the external tools ribbon. Just like Tabular Editor, you can open it up and make changes to a PBIT for certain changes. And DAX Studio, you can connect that straight to a Power BI Desktop instance to author DAX queries, right? So it's the same concept, but the external tools ribbon will make it a lot easier to launch them. And at that point, we will have harden Power BI Desktop to external tool changes to some degree for certain objects. All right, so I'm going to that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and perform this comparison. So this is going to take a comparison of my Power BI Desktop as my source data set, and the target data set is the data set in the service, which is the one that maybe is already 30 gigabytes in size. And so if I find that big game table, which is right here, you can see that it has a ton of partitions defined in it, right? And so these are the partitions I do not want to lose. These are partitions generated by incremental refresh. I do not want to mess with those so that I don't need to refresh this whole data set again, right? So all I have to do is skip this table, and there are some options here that I can do this in a more kind of on a rules or a policy based basis. So I'll go ahead and skip that. Now I can hide skip objects to just focus on what is different between the source and target models, right?
Just so I'm clear on there, I saw you go really quick.
Yeah.
Did you right click on the line item and then just say skip?
Yeah, so like you can actually click skip, and thank you for asking that. Feel free to interject because these are the things that I might skim over too quickly. So you can actually select it from the drop down, or you can do it for one individual item, or you can control select multiple items, and then you can skip them all in one go. So for example, let's say these measures, I'm still working on them. I don't want to deploy these yet. I can just skip them all, select them all in one go and say skip all in one go, and they all get skipped in one go, right? So yeah, there's multiple ways of doing that. And then another thing that I did probably quite quickly is that I can, if I show skip objects, this is the whole model. So there's some stuff that from the last deployment that is the same in the source and the target. Like this table, for example, is exactly the same, which is why it has the status is same definition. And there's only one option in the drop down, which is skip. I can't update it or create it or delete it because it's the same in the source and the target, right? But then what I can do here, because this can be quite big, this list of objects, and it supports all of the objects in the data set. So what I can do is I can hide the skip objects right? I can either hide skip objects with the same definition, and then it includes the ones that I explicitly skipped, or I can just say hide skip objects altogether, and it's going to hide the ones that I explicitly skipped, except the game one is still listed because it's got child objects, which are these relationships, right? Okay, so now I can focus on just the differences, and I can get a much better visibility of what I want to do. So in that scenario that, you know, maybe we are harvesting some objects from one model to another one, where we're maybe using, you know, conform dimensions, or we're harvesting something from a self-service analyst that is super interesting that we want to integrate as a starting point into our kind of development semantic model. Obviously, we'll do apply some rigor to it in terms of alignment with corporate naming standards and you know, data definitions and etc. If I want to bring in those objects from the analyst model as a starting point, my source would be the analyst model, and the target would be potentially a mature corporate semantic model that could have hundreds and thousands of objects in it, right? And I don't want to mess with anything that's already in the target. So all of these items that have delete, I wouldn't want to delete any of them in that case, right? And so rather than selecting them all individually, you know, and going through and selecting them all individually, I can just say skip all objects missing in source, and all of the delete items will get skipped in one go, right? So that's it again in that case where I'm just harvesting something from one model to put in a different model, and I don't want to mess with anything that's already there, right? Then from here, let's hide skip objects again, and now I'm really just focusing on these items. So what have I got here? I've got a calculation group and a calculation item and some cultures. Right now I can do a validation of my selection. So this is most of the code behind this is just validation code. If you think about it, there are so many interdependencies between the different objects in the Power BI dataset. You can't have a relationship that refers to a table that doesn't exist. Well, what happens if I say I want to create a relationship and the table that it refers to I chose to skip? Well, that's going to cause a validation error. What happens if I've got, you know, ambiguous relationship paths being introduced, or I've got name collisions, or I've got Power Queries that refer to other Power Queries that refer to other Power Queries that don't exist, or that the list is literally endless. All of the different permutations of how you could compromise the integrity of the target model are covered by this tool. The claim of this tool is that you would never, unlike the relational schema diff tools, that you can quite easily generate a diff script that you go and run it on your target database, and it gives you an error because you're adding a non-nullable column with no data, or whatever the case may be, right? Unlike all of those relational database tools, there's much more guardrails on the ALM Toolkit, because the claim is that you should never be able to generate an update to a model or a diff script that would fail with an error due to the compromised integrity of the model in terms of the impact analysis of the whole dependency tree, right? So in this case, everything is fine. But to give you an example, if I wanted to, for example, skip this discourage implicit measures, which is a requirement for the calculation groups, and I've run validate selection again, it will say, sorry, you can't deploy this calculation group because you don't have discourage implicit measures set to true, right? So it's and because I don't have the calculation group, then the downstream effect of that is I can't create the calculation items either, because there's no calculation group to put them in, right? So you can see the kind of dependency analysis that it performs. So what I'll do is I'll bring this back again. I'll just say update, and now I'm going to validate again. And now it should be fine again. All right, and then from here I could generate a report in Excel. I won't run it right now, but I can generate a report in Excel that some people like to do as part of a deployment process for auditing purposes, because it maintains exactly what was actually performed as part of the deployment. I can generate a script, which, as you can see, is an XMLA file that I can open in SQL Server Management Studio later using the XMLA endpoint or the Energy Services Protocol. All right, and in this case, I will just go ahead and update the target. I'm not going to generate a script. I'm just going to go ahead and update it. So this will actually be bringing the metadata up to the latest version. It will be creating the calculation group and the cultures with all the translations and everything. And it's doing a quick process default here, which just you can control what refresh options it does. You could just like with SQL Server Data Tools, you can deploy and say don't refresh anything, or you can say do a process default that it will only refresh the tables that are not in a refresh state. You can actually pick it, tell it only refresh the affected tables. There's many different options, or you can do a full refresh, which, you know, for a big model would take a while, but you have all of that, and to configure all of that, it's in the options dialog. So I'll refresh this again, and then I'll quickly show you that in the options dialog. So now it's refreshing. So the objects, so actually before I show you that, you can see here in the options dialog, I had, you know, you can process only affected tables. You can process default or do not process or full, right? And there's a ton of other options here that I don't have the time to go into here, but these are policy-based things. Okay, so here you can see that, for example, the calculation group and the calculation item are now exactly the same in the source and the target because they got deployed. And the options that I chose to skip, I chose not to delete any of these options, or the game table, which has the incremental refresh partitions. All of that is still listed as a difference, right? Now, what I'd like to do now is I want to actually save this, right? Save this comparison, and let me just put it here in my downloads. Let's create it over that one, right? And now I'm going to close and reopen ALM Toolkit, right? And so I just want to show that you can actually store this comparison. I'm going to say open that same file that I just saved, right? And it's not only the source and target that is stored in the file. If I do the comparison, you're going to see that it stores the whole configuration, right? The individual skip items. So for example, I don't want to update a particular role when I'm deploying to test, because that's maintained differently in test, whereas when I deploy to my UAT environment, I do want to update it. So it remembers, this is like a configuration that I can just reopen. As you can see, I'm in exactly the same state. It has exactly the same skip items for delete. It has the same source and target. Obviously, in this case, the source is desktop, so it needs to have a desktop instance open with the same name, but it could quite easily be a file like a PBIT or a BIM file. And so it remembers everything. It remembers the options that were selected for this particular comparison. It remembers everything. So a common practice in for the old version in SSDT is that people would create a separate file for each deployment environment, one for development, one for test, and one for production, and they can completely parameterize the deployment and say, okay, when I'm deploying to, I don't know, to production, don't mess with the partitions, or when I'm deploying to dev, it's okay, or whatever. You know, you can completely parameterize how you deploy across environments. Okay.
This is a really cool feature.
Yeah.
It lets you just really tweak this to what you need, and you can even check. Is this a JSON file object? You can actually check that in back into code. So if you're using DevOps or some kind of GitHub to manage your code base, you can also check this file back in, and it goes along with your project throughout its ride.
Exactly. In fact, that's exactly what people would do. I wasn't going to go here, but since you just mentioned it,
that's what I do.
This whole demo is pretty ad hoc, to be honest, because I got caught in a meeting this morning that lasted like 3 hours longer than was scheduled to.
That's all right.
But it's all good. So that's the old version of this, which would run in Visual Studio in SQL Server Data Tools, right? Was called the BISM normalizer, and it's actually part of the same build, and there's a ton of users using this. I know what the usage numbers are, and so with this one, you can actually have these these files that are the same. It's the same DLL, it's the same process in the back end, right? And then I do the comparison much like I would before. And then these files, you can just check these files into source control, like you said, and you can have a separate one for each of the deployment. Because if you think about it, every time you deploy to a particular data set, you're going to be doing very similar actions,
Yes.
you know, very similar actions. And
Yes.
then it removes some of that kind of user error. Oh, I forgot to skip the game table. Oh, shoot, I've just blown all the partitions. Now I need to wait 3 hours to refresh everything, you know. So it really helps remove some of that manual intervention, the fact that you can reopen it exactly. So if I'd added a new measure to that data set in Power BI Desktop, it would show up as a new item here and it would not be skipped, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So I have one question. It's from Daniel Oetker, and he says, Christian, are you accepting pull requests? Because I have an idea to add the ALM Toolkit support schema comparing to the support schema comparing to and from the folder-based formatting that is using Tabular Editor.
Absolutely. Daniel, you must have read my mind. I've actually thought of, you know, integrating this functionality with the amazing stuff that you have. So I would be honored. I would be honored.
Okay, good. I chatted him in the window. I said, yes, send him a pull request.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not a problem. Well, you must have read my mind. So
good.
Yeah,
that's it. That's it for questions. Let me, oh, hold on. Maybe one. Let's see. This is, okay, so one more question. Basically, I'm asking for VBA for Power BI. I would like to use the heavy use of VBA like we do in Excel to manipulate doing charting objects and or other elements. So he's asking more about, so he sees the power of editing the tabular model BIM file essentially inside Power BI files. He's asking, is there an opportunity to use a similar tool or use this to manipulate other parts of the Power BI files? Like if I wanted to add visuals or if I wanted to change things about the other file. My understanding is BIM Normalizer or ALM Toolkit is focusing only on the tabular model. At this point, it's not letting you edit anything else beyond the tabular model of the PBIT files. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm afraid so. Much like with Power BI Desktop, we introduced the enhanced dataset metadata, which is aligning with an open standard documented metadata format, which is the tabular object model metadata. That was a big amount of work. People don't realize it. You know, that little, you know, unassuming little feature that if, you know, for a regular user that isn't using these things, you come into here the enhanced dataset metadata. It doesn't actually do anything in Power BI Desktop, right? It's like,
it doesn't show anything different.
It doesn't do anything, right? But it actually it opens so many scenarios for enterprise BI and bringing the analysis services workloads to Power BI and, you know, tabular editor and third-party tool integration and management with XMLA endpoint and all of the tools that are implied by that. So this little unassuming feature that doesn't do much took a lot of work in Power BI Desktop. This was a lot of work. We have the same work that we need to do for reports, for data flows, for paginated reports. We're lucky. We have RDL already, which is a standard, a defined standard. But for interactive reports, data flows, dashboards, you know, the workspace as a collection of artifacts, all of that we'd like to have open standard metadata defined for that we could just check into source control and then build third-party tooling on top of it. But it's not there yet, I'm afraid.
So the answer will be stay tuned or
stay
submit
tuned.
an idea at ideas.powerbi.com.
Please ask for it. You know, Marco raised a request on ideas.powerbi.com so long ago that it was called the Power BI designer, asking for third-party tool extensibility and probably a little bit more, but primarily third-party tool extensibility into Power BI Desktop. And that got a lot of votes. This was one of the highest voted items in ideas.powerbi.com, and it's kind of partially coming to fruition now. So absolutely vote it up on ideas.powerbi.com. We'll get extra visibility on it, and it will help present the case.
For those of you who don't know, ideas.powerbi.com is looked at by the product team, and they do check items that are on there. And if items get a certain number of votes, I mean, it automatically gets added to backlogs, and people start thinking of how we're going to plan for this stuff. So there are notes on all the items here that you can go to PowerBI.com or ideas.powerbi.com, and you can see things are under review or they're in the backlog, and they're trying to pick off the top most popular items and figure out how we can make those happen.
Absolutely. So, we go through that frequently in our reviews with leadership. It comes up all the time. We use it as prioritization entering semesters. We as PMs, we are very keen to build the features that we want. But obviously, if you build one, that probably means there's only so much capacity in a semester. And so that really helps us with the prioritization. So absolutely,
Perfect.
I'd appreciate it if people use it.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right. Cool.
Yeah, we're good to go. Keep moving.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, let's see. I think that's basically it, Mike. Unless there's any more questions, I think we're basically good. I ran through it relatively quickly, but I think that's about it. To be honest, it's, like I say, it's a very, very simple tool. Everything I demoed here. The only other thing that you can do is you can run it from a command line. I'm not going to demo that right now. Let's have a look here at the scenarios.
And so this is the equivalent of if I was going to automate something or do some automation with ALM Toolkit, right? That could then leverage some of the command line prompts to help me kind of automatically check things. Does this thing run inside Azure DevOps on the deployment machines, or how does that kind of work? Is that where I would be using the command line?
It just needs reference to the AMO Tabular Object Model libraries. So yes, okay. It can be automated and run in DevOps pipelines. And you could use it. I do have a few customers that do that, which is why I've added a ton of extra parameters to the command line. But fundamentally, the command line, the only parameter it really needs is the ALMT file, because that file that you saw me reopen has all of the information in it: the source and the target, the options, the skip items, which items I don't want to mess with, etc. So you can use it. There are other options as well, like Tabular Editor has great integration with DevOps and automation from the command line, and very fine-grained options as well. So there's lots of ways to do this. I'd recommend anyone looks at Daniel's latest YouTube video of that you set up for him, Mike, that covers that in a lot of detail. So I'd recommend starting with that. But absolutely, you can run this from a command line. You can automate it. That's not a problem.
Excellent. Well, we don't have any other questions. I do want to say thank you very much for your time. I know you've been in meetings all day, and yet you have another meeting and you spent time with us. I appreciate it very much. The time is very well spent here. Thank you for contributing back to the community. We will get this, for those of you who have been on the phone, we will put this video out on YouTube under the Power BI Tips channel. We'll get it in about a day or so you can, tell your friends on Monday, go look at it, check out the video, and you can see how ALM Toolkit works and how you can leverage it in your data models. The only other question I think that was here would be another good idea here, or another question was, someone was asking around, what are all the different ways? So we talked earlier about premium and how premium is used for the XML endpoint. And so we're talking about deploying using ALM Toolkit into that XML endpoint. Are there other use cases, where maybe my organization doesn't have premium that I want to use ALM Toolkit? Like can I compare two Power BI files back side by side, or can I compare a SQL Server analysis services to a Power BI file? Are there other different combinations I can compare here as well?
Yes. So it works with SQL Server Analysis Services and Azure Analysis Services. Predominantly, now that you've got the enhanced metadata format in Power BI Desktop, the comparisons by and large work. Sure. I don't want to get too technical, but there is the way that the Power BI Desktop instantiates data sources as inline declarations in M expressions does not work in SQL Server Analysis Services and Azure Analysis Services. So even without ALM Toolkit, if you just script out in SQL Server Management Studio, if you script out a Power BI Desktop authored dataset, even with the enhanced dataset metadata, and then you were to just run that on Azure Analysis Services, it would likely fail because of the inline declaration of the data sources. But going the other way does work. The way that the analysis service, Azure Analysis Services and SQL Server Analysis Services instantiate data sources, There are two flavors of those, and both of them work in Power BI. And so you would have the same issue going from a Power BI desktop to analysis services. But by and large, yes, it works with analysis services. The thing about doing comparisons between two Power BI desktop files or PBIT files, absolutely, you can do that. You can get the schema comparison to just see what the difference is. But in the current version of Power BI Desktop, there's still extra work for Power BI Desktop to be hardened to external changes, to the external tool changes to the data set, right? So yes. When we launched the external tools ribbon this summer, you'll be able to use Tabular Editor to add calculation groups and perspectives and translations and measures. But you would not be able to add M expressions and tables initially because it still needs to be further hardened to that. So you can use it for just, well, what is the difference between the two Power BI Desktop files? But if you want to actually update the data set in the target, there will only be certain metadata objects that will be supported, and we will increase that list as time goes on. We are planning on working on that aggressively this calendar year so that we can get to a point where Power BI Desktop is completely hardened to external model changes, whether it be through Tabular Editor or ALM Toolkit. And there's many, or just roll back to previous version. There's many kind of application lifecycle management scenarios that will be enabled once Power BI Desktop is fully hardened to external tool changes. But in the meantime, it's only going to be a subset of the tabular object model metadata that you can change. But certainly you can use it just to see what is the difference between two data sets. That's fine.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
And then there's one last question that just kind of came in here. What is kind of like the easiest option for organizations who are not using Premium today to kind of try out the features? And I think the easiest answer here is try it on an A SKU. That way you can kind of turn it on, play with it for a little bit, and then you can turn it off. I think the A1 SKU is the cheapest A SKU that you have, and it's about $1 an hour, I think is what it works out to roughly for trying out the feature. Is there anything else that I missed there from trying out premiums?
Yeah, that's the best recommendation, honestly. Spin up an A SKU, enable it for XMLA write, and then you can try all this stuff out. Yeah, and honestly, most of my demos are on A SKUs because they're super easy to spin up for demos and stuff like that. So
start up and pause them when you're done.
Yep.
Excellent. Everyone else is saying thank you. I think that's about it, and we'll give you some time back. Thank you, Christian.
Very much indeed. Thank you, Mike.
So much
Thank
for
you,
your
everyone,
time.
for attending. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.